to another video of Physiology of Heart. In this video we're going to talk about the cardiac output and its control. Please follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our channel on the YouTube. Let's start. So what is the overview of this lecture? In this video we're going to talk about the cardiac output, the regulation of the heart function, Frank-Starling Mechanism, pressure volume loop, but in detail, myocardial contractility and determination of the cardiac output. Let's start. Before that we talk about the cardiac output, we need to know some parameters. Stroke volume. As you see, in each contraction there is some amount of the blood inside the ventricle that they pump toward the aorta, and the stroke volume is single one of them. As you see, the volume of the blood ejected from the left ventricle in the single heartbeat. Each contraction will be stroke volume, and cardiac output is stroke volume times the heart rate. Heart rate is the number of the contraction in 1 minute, and at the rest about 5 to 6 liter per min blood will go through the aorta. So what is the cardiac index? Cardiac index is actually the cardiac output, as you can see from the unit, 3.2 liter per milliliter per min is the cardiac output divided by the body surface, meter square. And we use this index, for example, in case of the shock situation. And from that we can understand how much blood is inside our body. What is the total peripheral resistance? Total peripheral resistance is the pressure against this ventricular contraction. So each artery has their own resistance, and sum of all this resistance will be total peripheral resistance. And the way that we can count it is from the difference in pressure in the arterial and venous divided by the cardiac output. I'm sorry. So let's talk about the regulation of the heart. In the regulation of the heart, the first feature is the intrinsic regulation. It means that the feature of the own heart, and we can explain it by the Frank-Starling mechanism. Frank-Starling mechanism, it means that some amount of blood come to the heart and they stretch the ventricular wall, and when they stretch the ventricular wall, these muscles will be contract. But like if we increase the amount of the volume that comes inside the ventricle, this stretch will be more and the contraction will be stronger. So what is this stretching? This stretching can be effected in two ways. The first way is we have actin and myosin myofilament, and these two will work with each other by titin myofilament. And if the space between these two become less, they can have more power to contract. So the first thing that is stretching is doing is reduce the space between thin and thick filament. The second way that they can do this job is by the calcium sensitivity of the muscle cell, which is increased. What does it mean? It means that they can work with the less calcium. So let me explain it on this graph. This one is the normal situation that the heart myocytes are not stretched. For example, we have this amount of the calcium, and on this graph this will be the force like this much. But like with the same amount of the calcium, if the myocytes are stretched, as you see, the force will be much more. So with the same level of the calcium we can have more forces. This is what we explain here. And let me talk about this pressure volume loop here. In case of the Frank-Starling mechanism, it means that more blood come inside the ventricle, so stroke volume will be more because the end-diastolic volume will be increased and they will pump the blood. I'm gonna explain about this in the next slide in details. Let's go. Pressure volume loop. There are two features that we need to know. Preload, which is end-diastolic volume. Preload is amount of the blood inside the ventricle that they are ready to go to the aorta. They are already like at the end of the diastole, which heart's preparing for a next contraction. And the second thing is afterload. These two are actually like against each other. Preload is the amount of the blood, and afterload is the pressure against the ventricle. So now let me explain it in graphs. This one is the pressure volume law for preload. As you see, the stroke volume increase, so end-diastolic volume will be shifted to the right, but the isovolumic contraction is the same, and the aorta open at the same pressure, but they pump the blood with the more pressure according to the Frank-Starling mechanism. And as we see, we have more pressure in the ventricle. But the important feature is that the end systolic pressure volume relationship slope will be same. It will not change, as you see. So if they ask you with the change of the preload, this slope will be changed, you have to say no, this one will be same in case of the preload and even afterload. So in both cases, when we talk about the intrinsic feature of the heart, this slope will be constant. What about the afterload? Afterload is actually same as the total peripheral resistance. So if the total peripheral resistance increase, afterload will be increased because it's a pressure against the ventricle. It's a pressure of the arteries. And how it can increase? For example, when you are squatting, the pressure on the heart will be much more because more muscle will be activated and the blood will go to that muscle and they can increase the afterload. So what is happening here? In this feature, end systolic volume will be increased, as you see. Why? Because the pressure on the heart is increased and blood cannot go to the aorta. So more blood will be left in the ventricles, but the pressure increased because they need more pressure to pump blood into the aorta, but end systolic volume will be the same amount. And you have to know this graph very well, and you have to be aware that when just the afterload increase, the end diastolic volume will not change, but isovolumic contraction will be longer. They open in a higher pressure. The aortic valve will be open in the higher pressure level, but here the aortic valve will be open at the same level, but the pressure at the maximum level will be higher. This is very important and all examiners love these details. Let's go and talk about the regulation of the heart, but in the extrinsic regulation. So in the past, we talked about the intrinsic regulation, which was related to the heart. Here, we talk about the extrinsic regulation, which will be affected by the sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. We actually talked about the chronotropic effect and dromotropic effect in our previous lectures that you can find it on the Physiology of Heart playlist. Chronotropic effect is actually heart rate. So if sympathetic nervous system act, they will increase, heart rate goes up, parasympathetic, they go down. And dromotropic effect, they affect on the conduction velocity that we explained, SA node, AV node, and the path between them. So they affect on the conduction velocity, and if they increase, the heart will contract faster. The pathway goes faster. And inotropic effect is the one that we want to talk about today. And as you see in the sympathetic nervous system, all of them, they affect on the beta 1 receptor, because beta 1 is the one which is specific to the heart. And in the parasympathetic, they affect on the M2, which is specific to the heart as well. And they in the example of the sympathetic, norepinephrine and epinephrine will act, and in case of the parasympathetic, acetylcholine will be affected. inotropic effect is mostly sympathetic. The parasympathetic one is only effect on the atriums. Let's talk about them in detail. So contractility, the muscle contraction, is actually this inotropic effect that we talk. They correlate with the intracellular calcium concentration. I explained norepinephrine effect on the beta-1 receptor by the adenylyl cyclase, and they increase the CAMP by the protein kinase A. Then L-type calcium channel will be activated, ryanodine calcium channel will be activated, and they both increase the calcium concentration, and they make the higher concentration first. And how they actually work, they work in two different ways. One of them is the higher force, as you see here, I'm gonna explain them, and the second is the rapid relaxation happens. Here is a slow relaxation, here is the rapid relaxation, and all this function will be called positive inotropic contraction. So let's talk about this graph. What is this? Isoproterenol is actually something that can activate a beta-1 receptor. They are acting same as like norepinephrine for beta-1 receptor, and they can activate sympathetic nervous system. As you see in the normal condition, the force is less and the relaxation is very long, but here the force will be much higher and the relaxation period is shorter, so they contract faster, they contract more, and with the higher level. Let's go and talk about the myocardial contractility pressure volume loop. So as you see in this loop, the end diastolic volume will be same because the preload is same. There is no change in preload. But something that is changed is the contraction power. When the contraction power, the pressure inside the ventricle will be higher. But the other thing is because the preload is the same, so they pump more blood, but there is no more than normal blood inside the ventricle, so the end systolic volume will be less. And the important factor is in case of the contractility effect by the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system or any drugs, the slope degree will be changed and it will be faster. The degree will be more vertical. So it is very important that in case of extrinsic feature regulation, the slope will be a bit like increased and the degree will be more vertical. And there are some other factors that you need to know about the contractility. Temperature can affect on this contractility. They affect on the positive inotropic effect and they affect on a chronotropic effect. So they can increase the heart rate. For example, when you go to the sauna and it's like hot inside the sauna, the number of your heart rate will be go up. And ion concentration, if we increase the potassium, we have negative inotropic effect. That is really important. For example, in case of the heart failure patient, that we have to be very careful about the patient electrolytes. One of them is potassium. If the potassium goes above like some numbers, they can cause cardiac arrest because the muscles cannot contract. The second thing is calcium. If the calcium goes up, we have positive inotropic effect, and we can see both of these conditions on the ECG that you guys will study in your third year. And hypoxia and ischemia, when there is a ischemia, it means that some of the muscle are dead, so they can contract, so action potential become shorter and the contraction will be weaker. And what is the determination of the cardiac output? We can determine cardiac output in three ways. The Fick method. In the Fick method, it means that we add or remove a substance to the blood and it goes through one organ. And after that, it goes through the organ. Now we can count that how much of this oxygen or like any substance that we added is missed, and from the equation we can count it. For example, one of the easy one is the lung. We give oxygen, this oxygen goes through the systematic vessels and they go back to the right heart, they go back to the pulmonary arteries, and there will be definitely there will be different in the level of the oxygen here and here, and from that difference with this equation we can count the cardiac output. I'm sorry. The second method is the dilation method. In dilation method, we add some indicator to the one of the systematic arteries, and it goes to the heart, and then we can calculate it from the brachial artery with the machines. And in this machine, if we want to go on detail, it will give us some graph like this, and the area under this graph will be the cardiac output. But in the clinical situation, what we actually do is, why we can do that? Because some of the patient will definitely have some kidney problems, and if we inject them some indicators, they can injure their kidney, for example. So we use another method. We add cold physiological saline instead of the dye that we want to use, and we inject it through the cardiac catheter, like we put something to the arteries, and they go to the heart, and they go to the right atrium. Then we inject the cold physiological saline, then we can detect them on the pulmonary artery instead of the systematic artery, for example brachial artery, as I explained here. And we can measure the difference in the temperature. So from this difference in temperature, we can count the cardiac output. Thank you very much for listening to my video and watching it, and never be afraid of failure. This is just a way to the success. So if you fail any exams or anything, never be afraid and never give up on your goals, and just remember, why did you start?